The Game Schooler podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Dodo, our game of the week, discuss review copies in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our High-Five Untapped Themes. Welcome to the Game Schooler podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
Going great, Doug. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Hopefully we've got some good energy tonight. I don't know. It's we're changing up our recording schedule, and it's later at night, so we're either going to be dead tired or we're going to be loopy fun.
Yeah, and it could vary by week, right? I mean, it's our show, and so...
we make the rules.
I'm sure we'll bring the energy. That's right.
Yeah.
We don't have any sponsors to be beholden to.
Yeah. Wealthy donors.
Yet,
yes. I have been talking to a monocled man. You may have seen him. He may be one of the Parker brothers, but we'll talk about that after.
Oh, good. Look forward to hearing more.
So, any follow-up from last week?
I don't have any follow-up. I have a metric ton in What's Awesome with Gaming. Do you have follow-up from last week?
I do have follow-up.
Interesting.
It's been a while in reviewing last week's episode and Game Whole Con as a whole. It has been a while since I have had a game fire me up the way that Rock Hard 1977 has. Not only in a game, just the game within itself, but really evaluating my collection. I pulled another probably 10 games off of my shelf. And if you follow the Dice Tower, they had a board game breakfast just recently where they talked about 10 reasons of why and basically when to cull a game. And I encourage you to go look at that. It's a lot of stuff that you and I have talked about in the past, but just really evaluating of like, yeah, I had that game and I played it and I kind of enjoyed it, but I don't know when I'm going to play this again.
Yeah.
And with all of the stuff that there is to play, is it good enough that I want to play it again? What is that going to bump out of the queue? And it just really has gotten me thinking about that and almost... I feel like I'm going over a different cliff of when you first get into the hobby, you know, the only way that you really know how to play and try new things is to just buy them and go, right? And you're like, ooh, that sounds interesting. I'll buy that. And you acquire stuff. And I've then gotten to the point now where I've consumed so many games that it's becoming more apparent to me that I'm like reverting back to especially what we say in the podcast when we talk about the game of the week of like, try before you buy. There are so many games that are on my shelf that I'm like, that was fun to try, but I don't need to own it anymore or at all, you know?
Yeah, and not to just ruin your succinct train of thought, which is a wonderful train, but by consume games, you mean churning. They're coming into your house, they're leaving your house. You're just going through them. Or you're playing them once and then you feel like that one time was the consumption and now you're done with it, right? And you're moving on, not to be revisited again.
Yeah, and some of those are financial things where when I first started in the hobby, my financial situation was very different than what it was today. So it was that type of thing of like, my wife could get me a game. You know, I would put a game on my Christmas list for somebody to get me. Oh, I really want that one. Now my wife wouldn't even think about buying me a game, or anybody in my family is like, well, what are you going to buy them? You know, that type of thing. And so there's that level of changing in my season of life changing and finances and things like that. But then also my access to games is very different of, you know, the games that I have, the games that you have, Dan has and has access to, that it's like stuff is being played more. And it used to be a situation where Dan brought over a game and it's like, I kind of like that. I kind of want that, and sometimes I have those games. It's like I bought them based on that one playthrough and I've never even played my copy of it.
Sure.
So just a lot of those type of things and really trying to take to heart of like, yeah, these are games that if I could go back in time, it's like they were great to try. I'm happy I tried that game. But again, it's difficult when you don't have a convention or things like that. It's like somebody's got to be supplying new games, and we'll get into this a little bit in the School of Gaming, but the idea of just playing what's around as opposed to what's new and what's constantly coming, and that's not as important to me anymore as it used to be. That's I think maybe one of the other things that I'm finding is that hotness or what's everybody talking about at Gen Con or Essen is no longer as valuable or important to me as a gamer. That's like, I'd like to know what it is, but I don't need to rush out and play it, type of thing.
Yeah, you're bringing up some really interesting thoughts. I think ethically you now owe it to our listeners to have a School of Gaming segment where you basically give tips and pointers on how do you try without buy. Like how do you try games without running out and buying them?
And that's hard.
I think there's a lot of variables there. What you have access to, the people that you get to play games with. Are you comfortable on a board game arena or a tabletop simulator? How important is it for you to play the hotness? I think there's a lot there, and I think it really depends on where people are at in their journey in the hobby. But the other part, as you were talking, I think financially it can also go the other way. If somebody first gets in the hobby and they're in their late 20s or mid 20s and there's no kids, and then, I know the first time you have to make a daycare payment, it's like, oh my goodness. And then you have a second kiddo. Well, there's a decade. You have a third kiddo. There's a decade and a half of daycare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There went my gaming budget. So I think it can go. That is something that is also has a lot of variables. I think your candor though brings up a lot of really good points, and you're following up on it because just so that I'm making the connection. You played an awesome game last week, and then maybe had a few other gaming experiences, and that brought you into a new cull state where you were after you've already made several cuts in your collection. Am I following?
It's playing a game that was so good that made me question why aren't all of the games in my collection this good, or at least trying to attain that level. And I also think it's a hard thing too, where it's like how many times can you play a game before it gets old or feels old? Yeah, But then at the same time, it's like if you play a game once a month, are you going to get burnt out on it? Probably not. And my only real comparison to that is the games my kids constantly ask to play, and you're like, all right, I guess we'll play this again, and you get kind of burnt out on those games. But I don't know that I've ever been burnt out on a game that we played in a game night type of scenario.
Yeah, no, I think we're going through too many games. We're consuming, we're churning. Not to speak for you, but I know I don't get burned out when we play a game 1 to 3 times. I have a wonderful segue into the What's Awesome with Gaming, unless you want to stay on here and continue with the follow-up.
Keep it rolling.
All right. Approximately twice per year. So, folks, we're making a hard shift now to the second part of the opening segment.
You said it was gentle. You said it was a gentle segue.
What's Awesome with Gaming? Approximately twice per year I travel for work. And I'm gone for about a week. And this past week I was in Houston. And one thing and I'd never been to Houston before. So if I'm in a city for the first time or a new time and I'm all by myself, I try to hit a museum. Didn't actually get to a museum in Houston because I had too much barbecue, but that's a whole different topic for a different type of podcast.
A museum.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, hey, I hit 2 on the Texas monthly top 50. All right,
Yeah.
in a 2-day period. So that was kind of a mini achievement for me. But I like to attend a board game meetup, Doug, and I stumbled into an incredible meetup in the Houston Heights neighborhood, and it was in the basement of a church, so it wasn't in a friendly local game store or a bar or a tavern or a board game cafe. I mean, I'm messaging on their Discord just confirming where it is and the time, and I just want to give a shout out to that meetup.
Making sure it was the right night.
Making sure it was the right night. I've made that mistake before. I've gone to the pizza shop in Austin, Texas on the wrong night, just sat there all by my lonesome and only had 2 to 4 player games, nothing solo, ate a pie and went home. But we're talking about this past week, Doug.
Yeah.
It reminded me about what is awesome with the hobby and a lot of things that we talked about in our last episode. But this meetup was so kind, so welcoming. There was a group deep into the Ticket to Ride Legends of the West. You know, they were definitely on like the back third to 20% of that. So they had their own table. There was another group that was playing Apiary with all the expansions. Another group was playing Things and Rings, wonderful party game from All Play that I haven't gotten to play just yet. And I was fortunate enough to get to play Cryptid and revisit and play Castles of Burgundy with 4 players, and it was just an awesome night of gaming. And so I just wanted to say and kind of connect to what you're talking about. You know, Doug, you need to get that beautiful box of Burgundy open and get the Vineyards expansion to the table, because not to tell you what to do, but as soon as I got home from being gone all week, first off, I did take an evening. I checked in with my family. I did some things around the house to be present. But then the next night, on Friday night, I went right down, sorted that super special edition of Castles of Burgundy.
You haven't even done that yet? Oh, I'm way ahead of you.
Well, no, but I had some of those beautiful acrylic minis, not to go there, but I had to get everything organized and get the insert ready. And I played it, played the solo version of it. It's just really well done. I know we don't usually just bloviate over Kickstarters and Game Pound and crowdfunded games, but this was one that had been sitting on the shelf for me for a while, and I've been playing it ever since I got home. And that Vineyards expansion has this little Chateauma solo, which is the name of their bot, and the Vineyards expansion just adds a sideboard that connects to your duchy, and you have these little double hexes. And here's the spoiler: it's awesome. It's a whole new puzzle that's not adding too much. It's just adding more of a puzzle to a very familiar game. And I make that connection because had I not played Castles of Burgundy on a random Wednesday night last week, I probably wouldn't have opened it up when I got home.
Yeah.
It motivated me in a similar way to what you were talking about with removing games from a collection. It motivated me to revisit a game that is in my collection.
Yeah.
And get it out, get it to the table, play solo, play another one solo, try a new expansion. And that one is just really well done.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. One of the things that was awesome for me is over in the Discord server, Annabelle posted a cool article about a nurse and an elderly patient that were playing games together during the pandemic. And the elderly patient had some cognitive decline, and it was a way for them to do something that eliminated language and things. It was just kind of a separate card game that they could get into and do that. And I think after last week's experience at GameholeCon, it got me, and this article got me thinking about all of it. Basically, the core of the article was that, that they were just playing to have fun and to be social. And there was no, winning wasn't important. The skill building and development, stuff like that wasn't important. And
just playing a game to have a good time.
Yeah, and after GameholeCon, it got me thinking about all the different reasons that people play games and reasons to play games, and whether that's, to be social with other people, whether it's to focus on something to improve, an experience of do better the next time, to learn new games. The other thing is there's so much chaos in our lives that sometimes being able to control our own little world of a game is a big deal. to feel like you have some sort of control in life and interaction. And I guess the point is of what's awesome is that they're all awesome reasons and they're all equally valid. And I think that's important to remember, which is something we talk about a lot on the podcast. Like, do I want to play Chutes and Ladders every week? No, I do not. Do I want to play Candyland? No. But if the experience is about spending time with my daughter, not about dominating and feeling good about my victory, then it is okay to do that and to kind of get out of that looking down at, whether it's, they're war gamers and they're into this 4-hour boring stuff, or I can't believe you're playing Monopoly or the game of life. That's ridiculous. Some of that pretentiousness, I think we should just all appreciate the number of reasons that we've gotten from publishers and designers and all the people that we've interviewed of the reasons that they find gaming awesome and appreciate how valid all of those arguments are.
That's awesome, Doug.
So what else you got for awesome?
Yeah, the only other thing, I've been over on X, formerly known as Twitter. We follow some designers, and I got to tell you, I think it's awesome when designers announce, what future games they have coming out, even if it's not specific games. And so one example of that, the designer that's in our Spotlight episode coming up that was previously interviewed a few episodes back, Danielle Reynolds, announced that, she has 2 more games that are signed. Nothing more than that, but just that sense of celebrating that here are gifts for people in the world, for people in the hobby to get to try down the road. And I love that. I love that part of the hobby, that it's not just me, make, gimme, take. There's still a sense of, I've got an idea. I've got an idea for a game. And a company out there that says, you know what? We kind of want to sign that game, and we're curious to bring that project to life. And I think that I sometimes lose sight of that when I'm just trying to play the next game and have as a player, just try to have my next experience and forget about that designer. So that's what GameholeCon brought me last week, and also Twitter did this past week as well. Just got to see some designers when we were at GameholeCon and people excited about their projects that are coming out, and then also just seeing some really positive posts out there as well.
Yeah, I think when you're in the hobby the way we are and you have some of the interactions that we've had, you tend to, I don't want to say put people up on a pedestal, but assume that they're almost like mini celebrities, and you kind of forget that they're gamers that had an idea and gamers that saw somebody else's idea and like, I want to make this a reality, some of those type of things. And I think it's important to remember that as well. And, certainly some people do better job at leaving their egos at the door, but by and large, most of
Sorry about that, Doug. I'm trying. I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, I'm working on enlarging the frame for you and the YouTube video just to encapsulate everything that you...
Can you do that? I meant to talk to you about that. Can you make mine larger going the long way? I was going to say that my ma had asked, but now you brought it up. So
So anyway, let's move on to the Spotlight. This week we're going to be talking about Caution Signs. This is a 2024 release from Wacky Wizard Games. The designers are Scott Brady and Danielle Reynolds. And this is going to be 2 to 4 players, 30 to 40 minutes. Did I write that down properly?
There's more players than that, but I'll get that. You keep going on your
3 to 9 players, 20 to 30 minutes. All right. Each round in Caution Signs, you are presented with a secret combination of an adjective and a noun, such as stylish rhino, gassy monkeys, flexible cows, melting babies. There are 10,000 combinations possible, and you have 20 seconds to sketch an image of this combo on a caution sign. All of these images are then revealed to the round's guesser, along with the adjective and noun cards that you used, and a couple extra thrown in that nobody used. And the guesser tries to figure out what each sign is warning them about. And there's some scoring in there as well. I'll do some visual aids while you talk about what you like or your thoughts on this game, Michael.
Yeah, well, Doug does visual aids on our podcast, which is awesome. This is a cool party game, especially if you love drawing. And if you're like me and you're married to an artist and your kids are basically young artists, and maybe your best friend that you play board games with is also very artistically talented, it's also a cool game for people to play and just completely make fun of you. So I think this game works great in a school after school setting because of how fast it can be set up and taken down. Great indoor recess game. Really, really fun party game, especially if you just enjoy drawing. It has that randomness thrown into where where things just seem to fit and don't fit all in the same round. Brings a nice little pleasant tension to it.
Yes. This is one that is very funny. This is a funny game that as you're playing it, things are going to be ridiculous. The drawings that people are trying to do in 20 seconds. I will throw out there, I've got a couple of caveats I want to throw out there, is that if you go young, be aware that some kids might get upset that you're laughing at their drawing. So make sure that everybody's on board.
That's not exclusive to kids, Doug.
No, yeah, Michael was sobbing at the end of the game we played the one time. So be aware of that it's everybody's going into it. However, artists are going to do well in this game. And I think they did a lot to prevent it. But people that are good at drawing or coming up with those quick ideas in 20 seconds have a better idea of what elements are essential to sketch in those 20 seconds and what details to leave out, which I think is one of the biggest things. I think they did a good job trying to prevent that, but it's hard to avoid. So just be aware of that if you've got an artist in your group, they're going to do well just because people are, you get points for other people guessing your sign properly. So if you're able to make it clearer than other folks, it's going to make it better for you.
Yeah, and people who are artists are typically able to create mental images and get them out, write them quickly. Like Doug's talking about, you have 20 seconds. So if it's a basketball play, hey, give me some straight lines and circles and X's. I can do that in 20 seconds. But a pregnant astronaut, I don't know about that one. Or what were some of the other ones you were holding up earlier, Doug, and showing the camera?
A foul rabbit.
Yeah, I'm going to struggle with that one.
A crawling squirrel.
Crawling squirrel. Yep.
But and even so, it's like even playing with your wife, who is an art teacher. Her job is seeing and interpreting other people's artwork like all day long. So she just had like a dominance of being able to guess what other people are doing because she's seen so much stuff. It's like, it reminded me of those things when your kids start talking, the very first things that they say, and you can understand them perfectly. And then they go and like you visit their grandparents and the kid says, and then the parent is, grandpa's like, what did they say? I was like, oh no, she wants some popcorn that's on the table over there. That's how Emily was interpreting everybody else's caution signs. She knew exactly what they were.
Yeah, and to your point, it's also a game that she would like to take into her classroom. I mean, she mentioned that, so she has Hues and Cues and another Scott Brady design that I absolutely love. And a handful of other games that live in our classroom, and Caution Signs is another game that just fits really well in that setting.
Well, it's interesting because I'm curious about the idea of how would this do with all non-artists, which I don't have the ability to try and be participating.
Doug is so talented at art that he's unable to be in the non-artist category. Back to you on this spotlight of Caution Signs, not what is Doug great at.
You disagree?
No, I don't disagree at all. You were sitting on my left. My 15-year-old had basically her own branding sitting on my right, and then it was your wife and my wife. I was done. I was doomed. I just tried to enjoy the game.
I'm curious how this would play with all, younger kids and all non-artists, but also to your point of like bringing it into an art class where everyone's a great artist. What does that look?
I almost want to go substitute in a second and third grade art classroom for some random Friday and just take caution signs and we could try it out. That's basically the only way to try it. But what else do you like about the game? Because I have two other things that I want to just highlight while we're talking about it.
I mean, I like how fast it plays. I love any time that you can get people laughing and having a good time. I think this game hits on all of those buttons. I think the scoring is a bit tricky to keep track of, but that's the case with most party games, where the enjoyment of this game is seeing everybody's drawings and then those, sometimes those adjectives come out and it's like, what's the difference? How does somebody represent a walking squirrel compared to a crawling squirrel? Things like that where you're like, and those extra words get thrown in there and you're like, oh, this is going to be a disaster. Depending on what, it's like jumping and leaping or something like that. And you're like, why did leaping have to come out? Like those type of things I think are fun. And I think it's a fun game if you have a family that's really interested in Pictionary. Yeah. I think this could work. I also think a cool, fun, like classroom activity would be if a teacher got this game and then just had all of her students, like just pick one of those things out and just like crawling squirrel or whatever, or, rotten astronaut, and then just have all of your kids do that one sign and just see how they all look out and see how different kids chose to represent those items. I think is a cool way to use this almost as an activity in a classroom as well as the actual game.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to try with the right group of kiddos, and it could also turn into a nightmare with a different group of kiddos.
Yeah.
I love the verbal cadence of the game. As the timer starts to wind down, you can feel the tension at the table, and people will be confident, and other people will not be so confident. And then when the guessing happens and unfolds, I enjoy some of that banter and that back and forth. And then the second thing that I also really enjoy about this game, the early rounds can lead to inside jokes in the later rounds and even in later games. And I think that's a sign of a good party game, right? When what was drawn in the first round helps somebody or hinders somebody in the second and third and fourth round, because now you have a little bit of baseline knowledge to work from, where people try to use earlier clues to help them with later clues. So those are two other things I just want to highlight.
Well, and there's invariably going to be a moment of the game where somebody puts lines on the outside of their animal or creature, and people are not able to determine whether that means that the animal smells or is shaking. Like, is the adjective shaking or rotten? Or, like one of those type of things. Like, is that jumping, throwing? What are those lines doing? And
let me know when you're ready to get back to the game instead of just critiquing my drawing, okay?
I'm not. I'm saying that's for everybody. I enjoy that conversation that happens when the guesser is like, what? Trying to match those things up is where the fun comes in, because you have 20 seconds, so you're fast scribbling. You don't have time to do details like, oh, this means fuzzy. It's like, are they on fire or are they fuzzy? Because depending on how the words come out, those two words could be in the thing, fiery and fuzzy. And you're like, I don't know which one it is. So there's a lot of fun in this game. And it's also funny, too. I think my daughter is one that's good for throwing something down very confidently that then nobody has any idea what she drew, which is just as funny as somebody that's like, I don't know if this is good or not. My daughter's like, boom, and then gets angry when nobody understands what she drew, which is just as funny too. So that's our spotlight this week. Caution signs from Wacky Wizard Games and designers Scott Brady and Danielle Reynolds. As far as some housekeeping, you can sign up for our Discord by going to gameschooler.com/Discord. It is a great community. We are adding new members all the time and just some great conversation there. Just a great community. So check that out. Spread the word about the podcast. If you like what we're doing, tell a friend, tell strangers, anyone that you think might enjoy it, and contact us with questions or comments. Email at gameschooler.com. Now let's move on to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game is Dodo. Doug, give us the stats.
All right. So the English version came out in 2024. However, in Board Game Geek, it is listed as a 2020 title. So there are a couple of Dodos in the Board Game Geek database. So you want to look for the one with a 2020 date if you are looking for the one we are talking about, which was published by Cosmos. The designers are Frank Bebenroth and Marco Teubner. The art is by Cyril Bouquet, Paul Mafian, and Andreas Reisch. 2 to 4 players. Takes about 10 minutes to play, ages 6 and up, and I'm going to be in agreement with that. And this is going to classify as a children's game for us. Speed is of the essence in this cooperative game, as the dodo bird has laid its egg on the highest mountain peak, but then haphazardly let it fall out of the nest and towards the cliff. By using teamwork, you can bring your rolling egg safely to the foot of the mountain. Quickly roll the building material you'll need to collect. You need to collect hammers and nails and attach bridges to the sides of the mountain. If you manage to steer the egg safely into the lifeboat, you have won. So while it is your turn, this is a real-time game. You are going to roll a dice. It is going to give you some sort of material, whether that is bamboo, leaves, wood, nails, hammers. And then you are going to flip over. There are a bunch of face-down tokens on the table. And if you make a match, you take that token and add it to a plank. When you fill up the number of tokens on a plank, you are then able to add that plank to the side of the mountain, which hopefully you can do in time as the egg gets to that section and drops onto that plank. You're going to go all the way down the mountain until you're hopefully able to make enough matches to get it to land in the lifeboat without cracking, and then you win the game.
What happens if that slow-moving egg... What
you
happens,
lose.
though, Doug, if you don't? Yes.
You lose. Yes. That is the loss condition. If I were better prepared, I would have had this whole thing built, but I don't. I alluded to this game a couple of weeks back about the excitement my kids had playing this game. And there's a real-time game, and there is tension to this game, and they were invested.
Well, and the memory component leads to that as well.
And yeah, that time they did not want that egg to crash. And they are yelling at me, "Dad, get that plank up there. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Somebody, roll the dice, find it. No, that's not where the plank is. The nail's over here." And they're shouting. They were invested. I thought my middle daughter was going to need some time to recoup after the 2 or 3 games that we played with how worked up she was getting.
So you thought your 9-year-old was going to need some iPad time to recharge from the intense board game.
Yes.
Okay. I like it.
I think that this is really unique game because engagement doesn't always mean to sit still. A lot of times when we think about board games and kids, it's, okay, how can we get them to sit at the table and focus and sit down, stop hopping, don't be moving around, don't bend the cards, all the things that, you're trying to turn your kids into little gamers. This is one that they can be hopping around. They are going to be up around the table. There is a general excitement to this. You can just have fun. But because of that real-time component, everybody is engaged in a different way. So if you're looking for a game for younger kids that is going to be active and not just sit down and learn rules and hope that everything goes right, this is a great game to have a little bit more fun and excitement around the game table.
Yeah, this game looked really well when we saw a demo at Gen Con 2024, and I wasn't dismissing it or minimizing it. It's just we saw so many games that demoed well in a 2-hour period. We saw this game. We saw The Gang. We saw Nanatuck, all at Belrati. Four beautiful games at Cosmos. But what got my attention about Dodo when we were, and I think I mentioned this back in episode 186 on our Publisher Spotlight when we had Cosmos on, when we were leaving Gen Con, the last thing that I heard a family say was, that was a lot of fun, and I'm really glad that we got it. And I turned around, and it was mom and dad playing games with their two kids that were right around our kids' age-ish, like 8 to 10-year-old. And the dad said, that was a lot of fun. And the kids were like, yeah. And it's like, whoa, Dodo did that? I need to check that out. And I know you had that experience with your kids. And then when we were reviewing the game and playing it, I had that experience. Where I was like, I kind of want to play that again. That was really close on the super easy version. The game has a great hook. When people talk about toy factor, you would think that egg rolling down the hill should roll much faster, but the weight that's in it has it just perfectly set up. I do have one question for you, but I'll hold it. Yeah, Doug's showing the people on screen. It is a gravity-defying egg. We're like, is there an AI bot in there on a timer? What's going on? But it's still moving. It brings nice tension like a sand timer, but it's much more visual because it is moving down right in front of your face.
Yeah.
How's setup and punch out, Doug? Because I only saw it on the table. I saw a demo at Gen Con. I saw a family playing it at Gen Con, and then I came over to your house. You had it all set up. That was my one question for you about the game.
It's a little bit of work to get it. Probably the boat. The boat that catches the egg is probably the most time consuming thing. But once you get everything punched out, there's like a lot of these. When you're building the mountain, there's a lot of these little holes that all need to get punched out. So it's a little time consuming. But once you're used to setup and takedown, it's a breeze. So after that initial process, you probably it probably takes longer to make sure that all of the tiles are flipped over than it, so you can have one person setting up and throwing all the tiles on the table and making sure they're all flipped over. By the time they're done with that, I will have had the mountain built.
Yeah.
So that works out pretty well. You mentioned there's some variable difficulty options, which I think helps. I will say that, to be aware that this isn't a game that you're going to age out of.
Is or is not? Is, yeah. Okay.
Is. We talk about what's the difference between a kid's game and a family game, and it's a kid's game is going to have a cap. Now, sure, Michael and I could pull this game out and have a blast, and we're going to have fun, but that's going to be more of a lark. Eventually,
we may not be the norm.
Yeah, well, that too. So you will age out of this one. And I'm not usually a fan of real-time games. It's not something like I don't really want that pressure. But this has more of a hot potato feel to it rather than that kind of ticking time bomb of like, oh, I got to do this. It has more of that type of energy. I don't know if that's the right explanation, but that's the closest thing I could think of is or a musical chairs type of energy to it, as opposed to some of the other real-time games where and I think maybe because it's cooperative makes it a little bit better, that we're all sharing that tension as opposed to just me and it's like, well, I didn't do it and my turn got screwed up type of thing.
And I don't have as many plays as you, but in my limited plays, it's close. And I think that also lends to making the game work. That if you win or if you don't win, it really is close. And the other thing, and if I didn't have kids and play games with my own kids a lot, I wouldn't know this about myself. Growing up, I didn't care for games that had a memory component. And as an adult, with some of these kids' games, boy, I'm drawn to them. We talked about Turtle Splash in episode 142 as a game of the week, and Dodo for me does a lot of those same fun things, but in a cooperative setting, not as a competitive of I win and you lose. We're going to win or lose together. I like that sense of seeing where something is and then having to turn it over and task switch to hopefully come back to it and get it again.
Which is
and
hard.
Some
to keep...
people may not, but as an adult playing with my own kids and other people's kids, that is something that I do enjoy.
And I think there's the randomness of rolling the dice that it doesn't become as much of a memory game as more of a speed challenge and potentially because, for example, I can roll a dice and it comes up that I need a plank and I flip over a bamboo.
Doug.
Which is terrible. And probably going to destroy the egg because of it. But at that point, I theoretically know where a bamboo is. But on my next turn, I have a 1 in 6 chance of rolling a bamboo. And so that may not even come up. So it's more paying attention to like on other people's turn, depending on what comes up. And there's a lot of wild tiles in there. They're like islanders that you can use. So if you flip over an islander, it's an automatic match. So it really feels more speedy than maybe a memory component to it, which I think makes me like it a lot because I'm not a huge memory fan either. But that speed and somehow it just works where it's like I flip over the wrong thing and my kids are like, "Dad, what are you doing?" And like I like that.
Yeah, I do too. Can I take a moment and just talk about the egg?
Yeah.
If you think there's magic in the egg, you may want to pause or just skip 45 seconds. Okay. In researching for this segment, I was on the Board Game Geek forum, and any listeners who know Board Game Geek, there's a nice little video posted there of basically somebody cut the egg open so you could see the insides of it. Now, I'm not going to spoil it, because I like to believe that there's magic in the egg, but it is very interesting to see how the publisher made it work. And we've had some guests on recently who've talked about kind of how the sausage gets made on inserts and other parts of the hobby. And this is a component that's pretty cool and one that I think will come up in future High Five lists down the road because of how counterintuitive that egg slides down the slope.
Yeah, well, even the components of putting those planks along the mountain is a really cool element as well that works really well, and I've not had any issues with that either. So, just as far as the engineering of the game, phenomenal job from them. What about skills, Michael? What jump out at you?
Skills and fit, I think. Definitely comprehension and just communication, and really thinking from a 6 to 8 year old standpoint, being able to see where things fit together and being able to communicate at a group, especially if other people at the table don't want to do exactly what you want to do. I think those are two skills that can come out, and that you talked about some games earlier of Candyland and Chutes and Ladders and things like that. I think that Dodo is one of those games that if you get in your house, you could have a 6, 7, 8 year old that you get 25 to 30 plays out of this game, or the game just keeps coming back. And so some of those skills may layer on top of each other, but even in just 3 to 4 plays, I think you're going to see some nice comprehension and communication skills.
Yeah, I've got the observation, just loosely keeping track of what's getting flipped over and things like that. And then the general cooperation of that sharing of victory and working together as a team, I think is a big component that works really well for younger players. Certainly there's the time component and the time management of doing things quickly. And then just processing the information that's going on are some big ones for me.
Yeah, and if things don't go well, Doug, and you have to do an incident report, an after-action evaluation or report, you've got personal responsibility. So I think some of that, if it goes well or doesn't go well, some of the verbal reflection and just asking group kiddos discussion. And people at the table about, well, what could we have done differently, or what happened? What should we have tried to get it into the boat better? So,
Daddy can get a better memory.
Hey, it's not always Daddy's fault.
Probably
Sometimes
is.
kids
In my
need to
case,
play
it
better
is.
too.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a game that adds a lot of energy to game night and has, those, if you're looking for a game that's got stand-up moments, high-fiving and cheering at the end, and feeling like, oh, we were so close. Even if you lose on the first thing out of you can't get the first plank out, it still feels like, oh, we were so close. We were one little token away, and we would have had that up there. And I think that gets people coming back to it. And so I think it's a really solid game. Anything else you want to add, Michael?
Yeah, this is our first kids game in almost 6 months. Just looking back at our sheet, Concept Kids we did back in April. That was all the way back, episode 164. So I think in terms of a fit, if you are playing games with kids, this game does fit great. And now if you're playing Dead Reckoning and hobby level games and Hegemony with your game group and you think Dodo's going to be a palate cleanser, I don't know. But certainly if you're looking for a solid kids game at a decent, decent entry point that you can get up and running and have some fun and make some memories. We saw it with a family at Gen Con. Doug's had it in his own house. So
yeah,
that's
and
my take.
I think you're probably going to age out maybe at the 12 to 13 range. You're not going to get that level of investment that you're going to get from between 7 and 10.
That's the age out point for a lot of games, isn't it?
Yeah, which I think is a sweet spot for that 7 to 10. But it's a great game that offers some different engagement that normally you don't think about with gaming, and has, like I said, those stand-up moments. So check that one out. That is Dodo from Cosmos and published in 2024.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we discuss how the Game Schooler podcast handles review copies. Doug, do you want me to lead us into the segment? Do you want to lead us into the segment? Where should we go with this?
I don't know. I've got a lot of bullet points, but go ahead, fire away.
Yeah, I'll just get started, and I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of where, just a touch point of where this really came up. There was a Board Game Wire article in July of 2023, and the title says, FTC, which is a Federal Trade Commission, which is part of the United States government, warns board game influencers, publishers over failing to properly disclose relationships and free gifts. And so in July of 2023, the United States federal government issued guidance, updated guidance, and they're updating guidance that was 14 years old. And that's not uncommon for the federal government. They will update guidance every so often, sometimes 4 or 5, sometimes 9, 10, 15 years. Well, the previous guidance did not have such a thing as content creators or board game creators. And so that guidance really kind of set off where if you ever listen to podcasts or watch YouTube, people will talk about, oh, this is a review copy, this is a review copy, to make it very clear just where they got it so that they are in line with that guidance. And so, board game content creators noticed. And the one thing that I want to say before I turn it over to you is to just kind of talk about the tiers. And I don't want to get into Federal Government 101. I'm not a lawyer. You should seek your own legal counsel. But at the top, in the United States government, we have the United States Constitution, and then that's the high end of the pyramid. Right under that are laws. Underneath laws, you have regulation. And then at the very bottom of the pyramid, you have other documents, which are guidance and policies. So, you can find all sorts of threads on Board Game Geek and other content creators who are opining about this or that, or what you should say and shouldn't say. And that it's been a topic in the hobby for a bit, and one that we've kind of talked about offline, and just kind of where do you disclose that? How do you disclose that? And so I just wanted to frame some of the particulars of the conversation, not that any of it's helpful, and other shows may do it their own way, but just kind of frame it around there.
And I think a lot of it comes down to when you get into a situation where there is an agreement between an influencer and or a content creator and a publisher with the explicit intent of, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to strongly encourage people to buy. That strong ask of the call to action of go out and buy this immediately. It's such a great game, and then not disclosing that. And a lot of times it's the idea that there's also money exchanged in addition to just the review copy, that there is some sort of verbal contract behind that. So
or written contract.
I
will create a video for your Kickstarter. I expect to have $3,500. I will get you this video within 8 to 10 weeks. It will meet these quality standards and key performance indicator. Contract. And for us, we're a boutique show. We know our numbers. We know our downloads per week. And so we just wanted to, I think, also have a conversation about how we handle review copies and kind of our stance to.
So let me go through some bullet points of this is just general stuff that the game schooler.
You didn't care for the federal guidance, or was that okay? Just
no, I
checking.
think it's a great background.
Yeah.
I want to then couch our positions of the way that we handle stuff.
I like it.
On that is that we occasionally get review copies from publishers. We have never been or have been offered money to talk about a game. That's never happened to us. It will never happen to us. We don't make any promises that we will ever talk about a game that we are sent. We never say we will put this on a show. We never say we are going to even mention it. We don't tell them that we will have something up by a certain date. Those things are never discussed. If you want to send us a game for us to take a look at, we'll look at it. But that's the end of the conversation there.
And I will. And that's where, if we're soliciting, if I'm reaching out and asking for a review copy, I will let somebody know when I can get to it. So that's where you and I might be a little bit different, but my life is very much regimented in the seasons. That's to get it played. I will say I can get this reviewed. I can get this played in the next 6 to 8 weeks. I can give it a solid review and get multiple plays in before the end of 2024. That's very common language that I will use if I'm reaching out to one of our contacts.
But that doesn't even mean that we'll talk about it either.
No, because I don't know anything about the game.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll try. That's the only thing that's ever been promised is we'll try and get to it by this date.
Yeah. Which I think is reasonable if I'm making an ask to get a free game. You know?
Yeah. We talk about games we enjoy, and whether that game is a review copy or a Kickstarter that we backed ourselves has never had any bearing on whether we'll talk about a game. We've received review copies and Kickstarter games that we've bought with our own money that we have never talked about on the show. Which I guess brings up the question of why don't we do negative reviews? And I think one of the big things about that is we do not, nor do we try to cover every major release or follow the hotness or be the first one to the market with an opinion. That is a very different space in the hobby. There are a lot of people that do that are acquiring every new game that comes out, and they need to get it reviewed and they need to get it up as fast as they can before, whether that's to capitalize on the newness of the game and the hotness. And that's just not our market model or business model. That's not something that we're chasing after. We also believe that every game has an audience, even if that is not us. We are very critical of games privately when we're talking about games, but we just don't feel the need to air that because we know how much work and time and effort goes into creating a game. And if your baseline thought is that every game has an audience, why would we yuck somebody's yum, as they say? And we've started to branch out with more games in the Spotlight segment that maybe don't jump off the page to us. You know, games that we want to talk about or highlight, or one of us likes, maybe the other one doesn't care for.
Well, and I think that's the big thing right there. because our game of the week, we have consensus. Both of us stand by
Yeah.
it. It meets our stringent criteria. Our spotlight segment, and we've done enough of it now where our listeners can probably get a sense of it. One person generally likes that game more than the other for a variety of reasons. We are different humans, and we still want to cover games that one of us likes, even if the other one doesn't meet their or our stringent criteria for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of great games out there, and if we can, cover 2 head on per episode, we think that's awesome.
Yeah. Anything else? Like, what else do you have in your notes, Michael? I mean, I think did I miss anything on the way that we kind of handle games and reviews and things like that? I know we've talked and danced around it in the show throughout 194 episodes, but just to be clear and concise on that.
Yeah, I'll just say 2 things. One, we've both invested probably well into 5 figures over the 4 years for the show. So, so I mean, we know what we're spending to keep the show running. So that's just one thing that's out there. And then the other piece, I started off, I'm just going to kind of bookend it. The actual law is the Consumer Review Fairness Act. And if anyone is looking for late night reading, you can get on the Federal Trade Commission website and read it. And there's really, 3 parts to that act. And what Doug was talking about, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I do love some federal law. What Doug was talking about, I think sometimes the slippery slope that can happen with negative reviews, at least a sense that I get, is somebody really is looking for something. They are genuinely harping on a game so that maybe they get the next one. And I don't know, but for us to comply with the guidance and the laws, we do try to disclose when we get a review copy, especially if one of us is keeping it and loving it. And otherwise, we just try to give games a fair shake. And we have a process for doing it. We have a process for tracking what we get. And that's kind of how we handle it.
Well, and here's the other thing is normally if it's a game that we love and we keep, publishers are only sending us 1 copy of a game. So if it's a game that both of us love, what we will inevitably buy another copy, and then Michael and I split the cost of the new version, whatever the new one is. So we're both, contributing or getting that discount to keep the games that we really love. The other ones, we use them in after school programs. We've, donated some things like that we try and, pay things forward as well with the, that type of bonus that we get for doing the podcast. It's kind of a weird thing, and it's certainly something that you and I try really hard to be honest, and that's, I think anybody that's listened to us long enough knows how anti-hype hotness, and would not be surprised that we have the views that we have of, we are in no way are we ever going to get caught up in some sort of payola scheme or creating content for hire, A, because we just don't have the time for it, and B, it's not authentic to us.
Well,
and
it's just not a hustle
important.
we're going to entertain at this point.
But
I will speak again, hopefully not out of the other end of my mouth, but in order for us to tell a story about the game, we need to play it. And both of us do have, budgets. So if review copies do come our way, especially if I have reached out and requested one, I really do try to give that game, run it through its paces. And I try to play it solo and then play it with another human, even if it's 2-handed solo, and even if the human is not Doug. But I really do try to get those games into our regular routine. And the last thing I'll say, the review copies help us do the show. They do. We've had a number of surprises that people have just handed our way and been like, whoa, they knew that game was going to be a good fit for us. And It really was. And I mean, one quick example of that, if I may, or should I not go down that and give one particular?
Either way.
Note this moment in time.
Go ahead. I feel like we've teased it at this point.
Yeah, we were at Gen Con and talking to somebody at Hachette, and they're like, you guys got to try Expeditions. And they knew the games that we'd covered in the past. And I know I was lukewarm. I don't know how you were feeling. And you were like, yeah, I'll check it out. And we got at home and played it. And we didn't just play it once. We didn't just play it twice. I mean, we played that thing for a few weeks straight. We're like, yeah, this is an easy game of the week. We need to tell the story of this game. And so sometimes it is just that, those review copies happen serendipitously. And then other times we do strategically kind of map out and say, okay, I'd like to try to get a copy of this game. Who has the best price? And are we going to split it? How are we going to make it work? So I don't know if we could do the show without review copies at the level that we're doing it currently. That would be a different hypothetical that I don't know.
Yeah, well, and like Michael, like I said earlier, is that we're never making promises that we're going to talk about it or talk glowingly about anything. And certainly we've gotten games in the past. It's like based on hype or what people are buzzing about. It's like, ooh, that seems like it'd be interesting, and we get it, and we're like, yeah, we don't really care for that, and it's never heard from again. So there's just as many of those scenarios as there are of we got a game as a review copy and loved it and talked about it, and whether it worked out kind of in two ways good, which was at I think episode 100 earlier, our first 100 episodes, we used to talk about games that would be great to adding to a collection. And after episode 100, we changed that to try if you get the chance, which was going against our anti-consumerism slant of the podcast and why we switched that and knowing that teachers and families are on budgets and telling them to buy every game that we recommend, and not that we were actually doing that we say this would be a great addition to a collection type of thing. But that has gone hand in hand with we started it to be anti-consumerism and not just consume, but also works well as like, we're not telling you to buy any of the games that we talk about. Go out and try them. Try them for yourself. Yeah. There are a lot of different ways to try a game for free without buying them. And I think that's what also separates it from a lot of other content creators is that we have always said, certainly from episode 100 on, give it a chance. Try it if this sounds interesting, right?
Yeah, and from that point, so we were about 6 months ahead from the updated guidance. And so, I mean, if you look at the Code of Federal Regulations and you look at the definitions of endorsements and endorsers and products, I feel really good about how we handle review copies. I'm happy to share any of those links or have a conversation offline because that's a different passion for me that somewhat does intersect my day job, but not really. But I do read the Code of Federal Regulations for other federal laws often. And so it's something that I'm interested in, and I want to make sure that we're being that we're following the rules, Yeah. And so, not that makes any sense, but I do feel like our timing was pretty good for the updated guidance that came in July, and it's also might be one reason why you don't hear us always say, "Well, we got this for a review copy." But then there are also other times where, I'll give one very clear example. When Kinfire Delve showed up from Incredible Dream, and that was a review copy, I wanted to know, like, hey, thank you, and I am keeping this in my collection, and I just want to be very clear and transparent. This was a review copy that we got, and I played, and I love it, and I've been pulling it out at conventions and playing it with other people. And I just, that's kind of how we handle it. If you have questions or comments or feedback, throw it in the Discord or send us an email. That email at gameschooler.com, because it's something that we will probably continue to refine and change and try to stay in line as the guidance is updated, if it is in the next 14 years.
Yeah, we're still going. Well, we got to get to that episode 800. Dr. needs to give us a mandate.
Can't stop now.
And so...
How are we going to reskin episodes, Doug?
I'm sure we're probably getting close to doing that. We're talking around the same topics. We'll just keep recycling things. But there's a little peek behind the curtain. Hopefully you enjoyed that or got some value out of it. Let's move on to the high five. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to try out after our last School of Gaming segment. This week we're going to be talking about Untapped Themes, which this list was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. Just because I was imagining all of the different games that could be out there. And there are some areas that I'm like, I just baffled sometimes where it feels like the hobby keeps falling into the exact same themes over and over again.
Well, the hobby is a business.
So, there's certainly there are times where something catches on and it's like, whoa, I've got to make a game that has that theme, and then another one, and then another one. And then there seems to be a bunch of themes that are just like constants in the hobby that never go away. And it seems like there's so much untapped potential that I'm curious to see what you've got on your list, but I'm excited about mine.
I think for the 194 episodes, for me, this is the most personal list that I've ever put together. So I'll just couch that because some of it might seem zany and funny, and others might be, whoa, that's kind of serious. Michael got into federal guidance versus the U.S. Constitution and a pretty serious topic all in the same episode. I'll just get it started. Number 5 for me is accessibility. And more specifically, I would love to see games that directly navigate a disability. We often talk on the show about my colorblindness, but for 9 years I was a special education teacher. And a board game in which a specific player has a math disability or a reading disability or is unable to communicate with words or unable to calculate income. I think there's an incredible game there and a whole series of games that could potentially be shaped and formed. I mean, imagine if you're assigned 2 random characters, one cannot do math and another really struggles with reading, and you somehow still have to navigate your way on some adventure or solve a problem together. So now you enter a universe where, cards have text or require calculation, and one can do one but not the other. I don't know. I'd love to see more of that. I absolutely love having characters with abilities and who are able to do awesome things, but I wonder if that was flipped and if talented designers really looked at it through, okay, you're able to do something, I'm able to do something, but there are things that I clearly am unable to do, and I need your help to be able to navigate this game. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's not fun, but I would definitely approach it. I'd invest some time into learning the game and see how it works.
Yeah, some games have done that with limited communication or limited knowledge or different things like that.
But not directly, like where you take it on, like, okay, I am unable to read. You are unable to calculate. Together, we are playing this game in a way that when you're in a special education classroom, and for our North American, folks who've been in a school, like that, we have classrooms where you have kids where they struggle with reading, and everyone in there knows it. We can try to protect them and confidentiality and all that, but people know, and we don't have games that have that space where it's that direct. So,
yeah, I think the one game that I can think of is Nyctophobia, which does that, which was developed by the designer was Catherine Stipple, and I believe it was her uncle or father or somebody who is blind, and they made a game in which there is you basically become blind trying to hunt with feel throughout the board. So cool idea there. I appreciate that. I especially love the idea of just the opposite of so many games have special powers, and just kind of taking the inverse of that is pretty interesting. So good, number 5. My number 5 is the idea of other hobbies, like the idea that we don't have a ton of games with crossover hobbies, whether that's the one I can think of is a game like Arch Ravels, and certainly we've done, there are games with quilting and craft, but like the idea of collecting stuff like comic book hunters, or cycling or insert hobby here. You know, instead of making a train route for the world and actual trains, like what if we were building model railroad layouts and things like that? It just seemed like there is some missing opportunity there for bringing in different hobbies, as if, certainly board gamers, like board gaming may not be their only hobby, and there's a whole bunch of different stuff. And I tend to enjoy those games, whether you're talking about Penny Black and it's like stamp collecting and things that are kind of unique, but there are other things that people love. I just love to see more games like that, and I feel like there's a bunch more out there.
Yeah, that's a good poll, Doug. And you seem to latch on to those. Like when you see one, you gravitate towards it, right? Like Penny Black is an example. Like, oh, that's different.
Because they're unique, right?
Yeah.
Which is probably a case for a lot of my list, I would think, is that they should all feel like, ooh, I'd like to play a game like that, because I haven't seen a bunch of games like that, but they would stand out because of it, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Number 4 for me, in a global hobby, worldwide hobby, I would love games that locked in on and unlocked meeting people from different cultures. People from different cultures. Not animals, not abstract, but real people. And how about we have encounters in a game that make people feel like they're meeting new people? This past week I had a lengthy Uber ride from Houston's gigantic, Doug, Uber ride was 45 minutes, right? And I'm meeting, my driver was from Kenya, master's degree from the University of Houston, owns 2 businesses, and he picks up people near where he lives, and he works near the airport. So he's dropped me off so he could check in on one's new businesses. And I had a 45-minute encounter with him. And this is right after I had a board game meetup the night before. I was like, man, how come there aren't any board games where I walk away and I feel like I learned something like that, and it's also very closely off of our first play of Rock Hard 1977, where I felt like I had a character in 1977 and had to make a few decisions. It seems to me like in the world of when you're sitting in the magic circle, as Huizinga has framed it, and you're in this world, we ought to have a way where we feel like we have met somebody from a different culture. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like that would be that tough to figure out. Like that could get on a spreadsheet, and you can make that into a fun game. I don't know anything beyond that. It's just something that I don't ever really get the sense of. And even in a board game podcast where we talk about the educational qualities of so many different games, that hasn't been an issue, because it would be a tough issue to take on, right? You'd really have to be deliberate in how you take that on, but it's not one that I've encountered. So
that's a good one. I think a lot of mine on my list, as you'll see, have a lot of that in the, whether it's a walk in the shoes or to just experience that time, place, or profession. In my case, my number 4, you mentioned Rock Hard 1977, is I'm surprised that there's not more games revolving around the entertainment field, whether that's musicians, movie stars, actors, directors, and even the idea of putting yourself in the position of, okay, I need to run a movie studio. How am I going to get these pictures made? How am I going to hire actors? Or I'm an actor and I'm trying to get work in the stage and the screen. Do I get a commercial? Like building up through those type of activities, which Rock Hard does a really good job. And certainly there are things that are adjacent to that. But you would think that there'd be a lot more. And it's a lot more with a lot more theme and that experience, that richness of the culture, I think is missing, where it's like, okay, you can have this little game and it's about music notes, but it's really kind of just an abstract. And then you throw on the other end of the spectrum of that Rock Hard 1977, where it's like, no, I've got a character and I'm living in the 70s, and this is, and I'm starting and maybe I'm going to miss days of work and building up and becoming that. There should be more games like that across the entertainment field as a whole. So that's my number 4, the entertainment theme.
Interesting. That's another good one. Eating is my number 3. I think that there's a lot of food games, but there
You're
aren't
just waiting
games
for
that
that
really
barbecue game.
approach eating. That's my number 2. But I put this on the list, and as we started to record, I haven't had the sense of, how am I going to justify this one? Like Doug's going to just poke holes in this one. I haven't had that feeling in a long time. But in all kind of quasi-seriousness, there are a ton of science games out there. There's a ton of food games out there. But I don't know of many games that really approach the science of food and eating. And, one of our old taglines of educational games suck. I mean, I think there's a brilliant science game there. I don't know if Genius Games is going to unlock it or who could, but it seems to me like we're missing out. There could be a really good eating game or two.
The Race to 5 Bills? Is that what you're talking about?
Hey, I don't know how. I'm not the designer. You're just talking about themes. What's something that I do every day, most of the time, 3 times a day, and there's not a board game of? Well,
I did have that.
Eating is one of those.
I did have that as an honorable mention of the idea of not necessarily eating, but mundane life things. And that there could be more of those. But then as I was thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, people probably don't want to do those type of things in a game simulation version. But I could be wrong.
My favorite spreadsheet.
Yeah. Loading the dishwasher.
Which is also my favorite spreadsheet.
My number 3 is historical figures in the idea of, and they can be from all walks of life and different career paths and things like that, through the lens of trying to succeed in the world that they did. And a good example of this would be something like First in Flight, where you're taking a time or a historical figures and trying to do something. And even whether you're talking about a musician or a movie star or, plopping Lincoln into the Civil War and saying, okay, you're living in this world. How do you get out of it? Can you do it as well as Lincoln? How are you, Freedom, the Underground Railroad does a good job of this. That, attainable historical games that it's like that I can play in under 2 hours, but really put me in that world of the time and not necessarily kind of the abstract of like, we're in the 1850s in general. No, I want to be in a specific, put me in Chicago in the 1850s, put me in, England in this time with all of the historical people that were there as opposed to just kind of generic land. So that's my number 3, kind of more historical figures and staying away from the war games and just generic history.
So you think there's a ton there? You think that theme is not?
I think you could literally take any historical figure and build a game around them. That has theme. That's not just an abstract or a series of mechanisms.
Yeah, you create a system and a game around that person. Okay, interesting.
So just for example, it's like if you have Oppenheimer and Einstein and those people, and they're trying to develop the atomic bomb and put them in that world, with the actual history, not just generic, we're going to make an atomic bomb or we're doing the Manhattan Project or whatever, like those type of real world connections.
Awesome. Yeah, my number 2 is barbecue. And Doug, it really is. And I know there's a 2020 game called Meat Sweats, the game that Doug and I yucked it up on an episode way back in the day. And there's also a game called License to Grill, which from Greater Than Games, which was successfully funded, but strangely I haven't seen much about it. But I'm actually talking about, like, I don't want to get too deep on it because you talked about hobby crossovers, but I love barbecue. And the science of it and the whole culture of it. And I know it might have peaked a few years back, right after the pandemic, but I'm still pretty deep into that barbecue game in my free time when I'm not, when I have some free time. And I, maybe there's cooking and other things as well, but I do think that is a theme that is really untapped when you talk about specific types of, whether it's barbecue or, you got New York slice in the pizza world, but there's all different types of food. And when you really get into it, they have their own culture, they have their own history, they have their own icons, people who have risen up and been restaurateurs and taught other people about the actual science of it. And so even as you were talking about the historical figure, my brain went to Julia Child, and I was thinking about, that could be a cool 2-hour board game right there. I think Doug might actually be right here. I need to just listen. He's spot on. So that's my number 2 is barbecue, but then that's the specific broader. I think anytime there's a place and a culture and a specific time period of food, there's potentially a good game in there.
Well, I think the cooking is a huge one. When you see the things like, cheese making or a lot of the food.
Charcuterie board. Yep.
Yeah, a lot of the food ones that come out have to do more with a customer wants this and you need to serve it to them. But there's so much more to that where it's like, I think about a game like Colosseum where you're putting on a play in the Roman Colosseum. Like, what if you're a chef trying to create your best dish?
Yeah.
And you got to get spices and you got to get this and you're hoping to try and make the best one. And maybe in the second round, your first round one was better, so your second round one's not going to score. And you're just trying to get the best one out of 4 rounds. There's definitely a bunch of scraps left on the table for that theme for sure.
We've played a few food games together over the last 5-6 years, and they just haven't worked. They've been order fulfillment with the volume turned up, and they just haven't worked for me. And I would say for us in the way where they've made a Game of the Week episode. So,
all right, my number 2 is one that I have on the list because we've toyed around with making this high five list several times, and there are just not enough games in the category, and that is sports.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about managing teams or individual players rising up or plays or simulating the sport, there just does not seem to be, and I don't know if that's just a difficulty with design that people have a hard time. I don't know if there's a crossover that there's not enough sports players that are also board game players and that just those hobbies don't cross over, but it just seems like there should be more when you have 2 hobbies that are about games, essentially playing games. You think that there would be more crossover with more quality. The sport that seems to get the most love is racing, and I don't know if it's just because it translates better for theming and game design, and the
Mechanics.
other stuff is a little bit harder, but I definitely feel like the business and finance of running teams and stadiums and sponsorships and hiring players and stuff seem to be a huge untapped potential there in themes, especially folks that like economic games and the Euro style games. So that's my number 2, sports.
Yeah, and I know that Portal Games came out with a soccer focused game and franchise 11. I haven't gotten a chance to try that out yet, but I think to your point, that really shows the lack of games, where we're having to stretch to find them, and that leads right into my number 1, and it's a specific sport, and that's basketball. I think that there's a brilliant game there from a coaching standpoint. I think there's a brilliant game there from a playing standpoint. The games that are out there typically do focus on that roster creation and forming a roster, forming a team. But the actual event of moving a ball back and forth and trying to get it into a goal and outmaneuver your opponent and build on your strengths, and the ball has energy and the magic that happens when you make a three and have a gnarly dunk, and when the unathletic person slides in to take a charge. And I just think there's stuff there. And I don't know if it's with dice and cards, and I've certainly tried my hand at one point in time. And I wouldn't call it a design, but some loose concepts that I've been tinkering with in a very specific notebook for the last 3 years, because I do think that, man, there needs to be a good basketball game out there. And I've tried a few of them, but I haven't fallen in love with one yet. So that's my number one is basketball.
All right. Not surprising. I can see that. My number one is couched in the idea that, well, I'll just say it. It's modern business. I feel like so many of the things, the games that are out, it's like, yes, there are economic games, there are business building games, but it's always farming in this 18th century. It's this printing
moving
press
containers
and the things like that, where it's like Smartphone Inc. opened my eyes to the idea of like how much this theme is missing. That there could be games on grocery stores and car dealerships, small businesses, running a department store, running a pharmacy, all of the things that we deal with daily that could be converted into a game. Now, maybe that's awesome. is too close to somebody's day job and they don't want that. However, I don't run a grocery store, so I would love to in my fictional world and theme. And those, I just seems like there's a huge missing opportunity there to capitalize on businesses that are running now. It doesn't always have to be the stock market before the crash. Stockpile is a good game that seems modern in the business that it's representing. And I just wish that there was more. I always think about, oh God, a grocery store as just a generic theme by itself would be like, okay, how do I lay? Can I? You could have a game where you're laying out a grocery store. You can have a game where you are in charge of one shelf and people are trying to get put on that shelf. We're all chip manufacturers and we're trying to get placement on Target shelf or whatever, that type of thing. There's so many different branches that you could do and make that an entirely a negotiating game. And so I started with grocery stores, but I expanded out to, it's like, no, it's just modern business in general, that there's not a lot of themes on. That just, it's always Old English and medieval and Renaissance and
they're safer.
Fantasy version of, we're going to be selling homes, but we're going to be orc salesmen. It's like, no, why can't I just be a normal real estate agent? Like, why do I have to be an orc and put a fantasy thing on it? So more
Doug,
realistic.
I've been meaning to tell you. You're actually an orc and I'm an elf. All right, now that we got that out of the way. Yeah. Now let's play this fantastic game on real estate.
Yeah. So that's my number one, modern business.
Modern business. Excellent.
And
do you have any honorable mention?
No.
Yes.
The only one that I had was the 4. Look at this guy coming in hot. What do you got, Michael?
Well, what's the only one they have? It was covered already?
It was just that mundane, like the idea of like everyday tasks.
Yeah, loading the dishwasher would be a great one, especially my family. I have tattoos. I think tattoos, there is there's a huge culture out there. There's an old culture and a modern culture, and the technology is changing all the time, and that's an untapped theme. I have shoes, and then two other ones, churches. I think although there's a lot of games that somewhat dance around it, I mean, you want to talk about a theme where you could get into and really get into it. There just aren't a ton of them out there, at least in the area where we cover games. And then finally, this is an untapped theme that I think will stay untapped because of the complexity, and that is around school design. Yes, believe it or not, folks, schools are designed, and I see a 5-phase board game that would probably take 3 to 4 hours to play, and maybe only myself and 2 other people in the world would want to
Hegemony
play
killer.
it would be a hegemony killer. Where you got this great idea for a school. Great. What's a pedagogical model? How are people going to learn? How are they going to get credentialed? How are you going to get them in? Now, how are you going to pay for it? Well, you got unhappy staff. You got unhappy parents. You got all these things going up and down in that third and fourth phase.
Superintendent the board game.
Well, eventually, or maybe you're just a lowly lead teacher and you got running everything by your superintendent. And your superintendent, how are they going to survive a school board upset? Dun, dun, dun.
Janitor.
Are you a public school? Are you a private school?
Janitor. Who's going to be the first one to clean up the biohazard?
So that's the principle in this board game.
Okay. Yeah, it always falls on them. All right. Well, that's our list. Let us know in the Discord server, or send us an email what untapped themes you think are still out there. We'd love to hear about those. Subscribe.
Can you tell
to the
we think about this a lot, man? Can you tell we think about board games a lot? Yeah.
Subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Check out our YouTube channel, also a GameSchoolerU as well, for a video version of this podcast and some other videos as well. Our Discord, gameschooler.com/Discord. Check that out. Next week, we're going to be talking about happy homes, things we'd like non-gamers to know, and games we love but always lose. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us. We truly appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.